Yo, what up? Today I got two books for you, both by Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I read Treasure Island here in May when I was in Sedona, Arizona. So it was really cool because I got to read the atmosphere of kind of being in the Caribbean. I was, by a river and had the sand and the water and the heat all around me to give me the nice atmosphere, and then finished Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when I was in Portland or Washington. So it was rainy and dreary with the same atmosphere there too, so that was really cool. With Treasure Island, I gave a 4 out of 5, and I enjoyed it, just not as much as I thought I would. It was one of those books I always wanted to read as a kid, but didn't, and I finally got around to it. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I gave a 5 out of 5, top 5 at least books for this year. I didn't have any problems with it at all. One of the best stories I've read. Definitely will reread it. I just love his writing style. I love his prose. I could, read him talk about anything. So it was really cool to finally get to him. So a little bit about Robert Louis Stevenson. He was born in Edinburgh in 1850 and died in Samoa in 1894. He had a lot of health problems all his life. He was constantly traveling, trying to find places that helped his continual bronchitis. He was always getting into fits of fever and coughs, and being bedridden for most of winter usually because of the bad weather, and kind of bounced around from Scotland to England to San Francisco to New York, the South Pacific Islands later in his life, just trying to survive his health. The top 3 stories he's known for is Treasure Island, Jekyll and Hyde, and Kidnapped, which I have a copy of Kidnapped and I will get to it. But I think I'll probably read the rest of these stories that are with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde first, because I like his kind of creepy, ominous vibes. He was a Scottish novelist, essayist, poet, and travel writer. He actually got inspiration for Long John Silver, which came from Treasure Island, an iconic character in literature history. He got it from an inspiration of his one-legged friend, William Henley. Funny enough, William Henley's daughter was the inspiration for Wendy for Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, which I also plan on getting to. It's one of the classics. Stevenson learned to read at 7 or 8. He was a late learner, but compulsively wrote stories. His first publication at 16 was paid for by his father. Went to university in Edinburgh. Is it Edinburgh or Edinburgh? I'm not sure, but I always switch it up every time I say something. But he tried going to school for engineering, but because his father and most of his family were civil engineers working on lighthouses, and apparently his family built most of the lighthouses around Scotland. Joined a debate club called the Speculative Society, where he was to meet his future financial agent and also his later biographer who wrote about Stevenson. He met both those people in that club. He eventually grew to be of bohemian nature, growing out his hair and rejecting Christianity, declaring himself as an atheist. Led to his father telling him that he had failed as a father. He eventually met his future wife, Fanny, who already had children and was still married, but they kept in touch, and she was also a recognized short story writer. Eventually, they went to San Francisco together, but him traveling there to get there broke his health. He had to be nursed back by some farmers in Monterey, California. In 1880, they married. She helped patch up his relationship with his father. They moved back to England. He becomes friends with Henry James. After his father dies in 1887, they move again for his health. From 1883 to 1886, so just in a 3-year period, that's when he writes his most known works. He kind of helped shift children's book into, instead of talking down children to, it doesn't read much different than an adult novel. I tried reading this when I was a kid, and I think it was just too much for me. There's not too many Scottish. I'm drawn to Scottish history and culture and stuff. at some of my ancestry, but I didn't really look into it too much. I always thought Scotland was just some set of islands off the coast of England, because you always hear of the Scottish Isles. It's pretty much just as big as England, has amazing geography and history, and there's not too many authors in literature, at least that I know of, that come from Scotland besides him and Sir Walter Scott. Definitely wanting to dive more into Scottish literature. About Treasure Island, so the protagonist is Jim Hawkins, 17-year-old. In the road journal entries, he helps his mom run this restaurant/inn. You know, they have to cook the food, they have to deal with the patrons and travelers coming in, and they're kind of in a secluded area. Someone comes in that's like, seems kind of shady, a retired pirate, they don't really know. And he's just so hard to deal with. Everyone just kind of moves around him and like just does whatever he says. And he stays for so long that he kind of takes over the place. Eventually this leads to a treasure map leading Jim Hawkins onto a quest, and they get on this boat with half a military crew and half pirate crew, essentially. They needed, you know, enough people to man the ship. It's a lot of, you know, tension in between those two groups, and just like playing chess, when to like act and when to like flip the switch, and pretty much both kind of holding out until they get the treasure. Once they get to the island, you know, everything kind of hits the fan. So a doctor narrates a few chapters where, you know, he has to change his prose and writing style and voice and everything, the type of vocabulary that he uses. He's really good at creating a voice for the character he's speaking through. It was really enjoyable. I really loved this book up until about right after the halfway mark. Like, he's really good at building tension and setting everything up. His most climactic point was like right in the dead center, and it feels like more of like the final act. But yeah, it was good. I liked it. Gave it a 4 out of 5. Like I said, I probably like won't read it again. The next story, one of my favorite reads of this year so far, Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. I just really like this a lot more, just because it's much more my atmosphere and vibe and story. It has elements of Lovecraftian kind of horror. It has, you know, Dickensian, like dark, foggy London, deal with, you know, a group of friends. It's a much different story than what it's kind of become. You know, everyone's heard of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. At this point, he's just pretty much the Hulk, but instead of getting angry, he takes a potion to turn into a huge monster. And there's just so many different adaptations. You know, original kind of gets lost. What this story is mainly about is honestly a group of older, like high class English gentlemen. There's a doctor and a lawyer and a scientist. They have upper class jobs, and they've known each other all their lives. They keep in touch. Mr. Utterson is the main character, and he's taking, you know, a walk with his friend, Mr. Enfield, and they're two of like the 4 main friend group that this is about. And while they're on their weekly walk, you know, catching up, doing what friends do, they start talking about this strange character that has entered, you know, Dr. Jekyll's life, this Mr. Hyde, and how Mr. Utterson he's a lawyer and he's taking care of his friend's will. Dr. Jekyll has put in his will that everything will go to Mr. Hyde. Him and Mr. Enfield don't really like him, wondering why this weird, crazy person, because Mr. Hyde isn't, you know, this big monster. He's kind of like this shrivelly, weird, grotesque looking man. He's smaller, but he's still like man-like. It's not like he's a complete monster, because he is seen by other people and he just looks odd, you know. Has a temper. They don't really understand him. He doesn't like anybody, doesn't want anybody around him. And yeah, so it just starts unraveling like why Dr. Jekyll has put so much faith into this person that from different, you know, experiences, no one trusts him, no one likes him, and they see less and less of their friend. And at a certain point, he just completely isolates himself, and they just like have no idea what's going on. It was 78 pages. So good. I didn't have any problems with it. I highly suggest that you read it. I don't want to give any more. It's not what you expect it to be. A slow burn. The ending and the climax is just super satisfying. Stevenson probably works better at this length of a story. Even though this isn't very long, it kind of felt drug out. Like, this is 200 pages. And I kind of got stuck after, you know, 125 or 150 pages, and I had to push through to the end. But this, everything's kind of more concentrated story-wise, and I felt like he was really able to show off his writing skills. And now that he's using the voice of a lawyer, found that voice much more of his style than, you know, a 17-year-old boy, because these were only written a year or two in between each other. No problems with it at all. I definitely will reread it, and I'm not much of a rereader. I loved it. I couldn't stop underlining things, just phrases, words. There's a lot of vocabulary I didn't know. I'm excited to get to his other stories. He has The Suicide Club, The Body Snatchers, and a couple others in here that are shorter than this one. But thanks for sticking with me and listening to me ramble on. Peace.